So right now in the House, they are considering continuing the NSA surveillance Patriot Act style powers, and there's been aggressive pushback against it. And at the same time, another $60 billion for Ukraine, which is really deep state money. It's money for the deep state's pet project there. And I think that is why we're seeing the backstory of both SpyGate and Russian space nukes. So the deep state, realizing they're in trouble, pulling out all the stops. So they had their Mike Rogers, who's Republican, basically the head of the Intelligence Committee, which was meant to supervise the Intelligence Committee, and instead has become the intelligence community's means of controlling Congress, put out that Russia's got nuclear weapons in space. So, we better approve that Ukraine budget. We better approve all that spying power. And they, because they were worried they were going to lose the vote. But it's also probably the backstory for why the SpyGate story got circulated, which is the adversaries of deep state power were reminding members of Congress how the deep state really operates. So, I realize that many people here weren't necessarily following me back in early 2017 when I wrote about this in January of 2017, not long after the president's inauguration, for both Law and Crime, it was then known as Law News, with a Z, and for Breitbart, and even got into a debate with Dan Abrams about it. And it was related to Trump's tweet and New York Times articles concerning the spying that was occurring on President Trump. And I had recommended to people, once Christopher Steele's name had circulated, read or watch Our Man in Havana, read or watch Taylor of Panama, one by Graham Greene, the other by Jean Le Carré. And in both cases, what those films explain is how the Christopher Steeles of the world tend to operate. The broader point I was making at the time was that it was pretty apparent what had really happened in SpyGate, so-called Russiagate, as the cover-up for SpyGate would be, which is that they used the Five Eyes network to spy on the Trump campaign and the Trump team, and that in fact that spying had started when Trump did an interview with the Washington Post editorial board during the 2016 campaign, early in the 2016 campaign, where the Washington Post editorial board was really making questions and interrogating on behalf of the deep state. Who were Trump's foreign policy advisors? Of course, if they truly understood Trump, they would know he didn't have any. That's the truth of Trump. Trump operates by his own instincts and his own takeaways. And he might have people that that give him information, but he doesn't really take their advice at all. So Trump just put together a group of names of people who had volunteered for the campaign. They were not people, Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, some others. They weren't people that were actually significant at all. But they then used that list and launched SpyGate. And it was to utilize and people at the Obama administration were complicit. NSA was complicit. They used, the CIA was complicit. The Director of National Intelligence was complicit. And the FBI 7th floor, particularly their so-called counterintelligence unit, which is really the deep state operation within the FBI, was also complicit. But they knew that in order to pull this off, they needed to use the Five Eyes. So the Five Eyes is a reference to the relationship between the spy agencies and surveillance tech capabilities of the U.S., Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia. Am I blanking on the fifth one? Maybe I am. Unless it's New Zealand in that. I'm trying to remember who the fifth one is, the Five Eyes is. Somebody will remember. But the main ones are UK, Australia, and the US. What happens is when any of those governments want to spy on somebody, but it's illegal or politically problematic, yeah, New Zealand's fifth one, then what they do is they ask their fellow spy agency to do it for them. See, it's illegal for the U.S. to spy on U.S. citizens in most cases, but it's not illegal for the U.K. to do it. It's illegal often for the U.K. to spy on its citizens, but not illegal for the U.S. to do it, and so on and so forth. So what you do is you launder that intelligence information by disguising it as coming from your ally when it's really your own. So and that's when they launched the full-scale, wholesale effort to try to derail the Trump campaign, to try to extort the president if he were to be elected, and to try to embarrass the campaign during the campaign, and to gather intel and information. In part because they truly couldn't comprehend that Trump was a completely independent actor. They've never seen such people. And that's why I don't underestimate the incompetence of these people. I knew at the time that those names were meaningless. All you had to do was understand Trump. These people don't. They literally quite conceivably cannot. And so because of the embubbled universe that they occupy and operate within, just like they couldn't understand how John Kennedy could say no. What? That can't be right. Oh, I guess we have to kill him then. And this is the way their logic works. So and it was clear that it happened all the way through, and that they were trying to disguise it and hide it. The UK tried to make peace with Trump by having one of their head intelligence people resign right after his inauguration. I pointed out at the time that probably wasn't a coincidence. But I was one of the only people talking about it at the time, identifying it at the time. Dan Abrams went ballistic. It's like, maybe I shouldn't have allowed you to publish that article. He goes, what about the Alpha Bank? That's what we should be looking at. I was like, you got to be an idiot. He turned out to be an idiot. That article, of course, was one of his best viewed articles ever. That was for Rachel Stockman, who was the editor then, daughter of David Stockman. She's a very independent thinker. And she's still the editor there. She's a sweetheart. Abrams kind of a prick. Not a terrible prick, but still kind of leans in that direction. Son of Floyd Abrams, famous lawyer. His sister sits on the bench in the federal court in New York. So that was what SpyGate always was, right? And Mueller was about covering it up, disguised as an investigation into Russiagate, because SpyGate was disguised as an investigation into Russiagate. So the goal was to make sure to continue to weaponize their power to derail the Trump administration, part one. And it mostly worked at preventing a détente with Russia that Trump would have more naturally achieved, but for their efforts. But its secondary objective was to cover up everything that happened with SpyGate. And Mueller mostly achieved that. But it was clear from day one what had really happened. And as I've been pointing out from the day they did the raid at Mar-A-Lago, my suspicion was, my belief was, my informed speculation was, that Trump simply had evidence of this and decided to keep it when he left. And that they didn't find it when they raided Mar-a-Lago. And of course, now that is also being confirmed by these reports. But that's what SpyGate always was. It's how the other thing that they do is the NSA allows third-party vendors access. And the way the deep state tends to operate for its most illicit operations is it tends to use gray space operators. That's why I recommend the Elroy trilogy of American Tabloid. American Tabloid, The Cold 6000, Death's a Rover, or Blood's a Rover. And those three will introduce you to those gray space operators. People who often don't have official government sanction or position, but are often essential to facilitating and enabling deep state operation. And often they're disguised as non-governmental organizations. Sometimes they're independent consulting groups. The Carlyle Group is a deep state operator to the core. That's why when they showed up buying Taylor Swift's songs, I was like, oh, now that is an interesting story. And was part of the predicate and impetus for the hush hush on Taylor Swift. The in the Super Bowl. But is that's how a lot of these people got open permission in ways they shouldn't have to do things, to do a lot of the illicit spying operation for the deep state during the 2016 campaign, and one goal was to cover up their role. Christopher Steele is our man in Havana, the Taylor of Panama, bragging about things he doesn't know, making up stories that people want to hear in order to create a cover story to justify all the illicit activities that various spy agencies were up to, and getting paid off by their private deep state allies over in Europe. And using their stenographers at the press to help propagate it. But that's what SpyGate always was. And that's half of what the Mar-A-Lago prosecution was all about. Biden just got nervous and demanded they escalate to trying to remove Trump through indictment, rather than the more sensible thing, which was to back down. So that's really what's happening on SpyGate. The Russian space nuke story sounds the timing of it very bogus. And it's kind of like a who cares. Russia has tons of nuclear weapons. We can annihilate each other if we really want to. Does it matter whether the nuclear weapon is here or in space? I don't see how it makes any difference. So but obviously they're rattled by the SpyGate stories reveal the political opposition that's growing, probably what they perceive as a Trump-Kennedy effect, that so many members of Congress and the House are willing to second guess and doubt powers that they haven't been willing to guess since the end of World War II, which will relate to the hush-hush, next hush-hush that's coming about how the John Birch Society and the populist right got co-opted by the deep state between 1955 and 1989. We'll get to that hush-hush in a bit. So that's always sort of the backstory of what's taken place with the SpyGate, what's taken place with it's just now being confirmed what I said was likely the case all the way back at the time in January of 2017. I think the articles are still up there that about how Obama administration could be in trouble for their illicit activities, how who and what the deep state is, and the Breitbart piece, and so forth. And confirmation of what I suspected was the case of what was originally behind Mar-a-Lago's raid in the first place. And it's why the deep state still fears Trump.